It's easy to fall back on data in the absence of conviction. And people want conviction, and really they want a feeling of certainty. And so instead of certainty, they'll just be like, oh, here's what the numbers say, right? But I think the numbers are part of the picture. They're not the whole picture.
I'm Pulkit Agrawal, and this is the Product Lunchbox, the bite-sized series for product people. In less time than it takes for you to eat lunch, we'll share some distilled insights and tactics from an experienced product operator on a single topic per episode. Really glad to be joined by Norouzi today. He's a growth expert. He built ClickUp's product growth team from 0 to 1, driving over $10 million in revenue. He's a freemium specialist. He scaled Spotify's premium subscribers from 65 to 130 million. That's doubling that. And grew podcast consumption by 40%. He's a product advisor, guiding startups on growth and strategy, advising companies like Fathom and Endel. And he's an experimentation leader, deep on pricing, packaging, onboarding, and a freemium advocate. So perfect person to learn from. Well, you've had a ton of experience doing product growth. I think checking out your LinkedIn, you've done it at ClickUp, at Spotify, two scale companies with lots of users. You did it at Yelp. So that's kind of maybe your niche, and you've been advising companies as well, maybe around product growth. So a ton of experience. We're going to talk about building growth, product growth, experimentation as a muscle. Mm-hmm. And what that means and how we do it. So I'm really excited about chatting. I think it's a topic that everyone should and more so cares about now, because product drives revenue more closely today than it ever did before. We have usage-based pricing. We have easier barriers to entry and switching. We have freemium models. We have what we're calling a concept of shifting left, even with user onboarding, where it begins outside of the product. Because in all of these cases, people want self-serve approaches to learn, evaluate, use, and engage. So super, super relevant and for teams to build this muscle. And I'm really excited to chat about it.
Likewise.
So maybe we start, one of the things I've seen following Linear, of course, which for folks that aren't aware is a new product management solution replacing maybe the likes of Jira or Notion or something, Trello in our case. And they talk a lot about not overly relying on experimentation and quant data, and focusing on using craft and building a product that feels good, looks good, relying on their intuition, their design sense, their product sense to build that product. So curious to get your take on that. Is there a shift from what is maybe more quant focused experimentation methodologies, data analysis, to a maybe more reliance on qual data that's packaged up as intuition by PMs?
I think I hope there's a shift, but I hope there's a shift because I believe there's been too much of an over-reliance on data. It's felt to me as if data has been the kind of default, and because it's easy to fall back on data in the absence of conviction. And people want conviction, and really they want a feeling of certainty. And so instead of certainty, they'll just be like, oh, here's what the numbers say, right? But I think the numbers are part of the picture. They're not the whole picture. And it's important to put numbers into context. And so I think people who, for example, Linear, I think their backgrounds are there are a lot of designers, and they've been in industry a long time. I think they've had a successful exit. They have a lot of what we call product sense. Product sense, when you do product interviews, is one of the main things that people check for. And it's just a non-wooey way to say intuition, because that's really what it is. It's, have you seen enough patterns across, UI and design in industry that you can kind of match against that?
I love this piece that you said, which is what happens when you don't have conviction? Where do you fall back on? And I see it today, in cases where we don't have conviction, it's like, let's ask the customer. And that really frustrates me. It's like, no, that's not the right, we need to build conviction. Maybe gathering more data is fine, but that's always feels like an easy, cop out. Okay, well, we don't know. Let's ask the customer. Well, that's your job to figure out the right solution, not the customer's job to tell you the right solution.
Right, exactly. And I think that's also a big part of it. I think it's, even asking the customer, I think there's a lot of nuance there. What are you asking them? Are you trying to ask them, hey, is this right? Because that's not the right framing. You need to ask them questions to understand who they are and what are the problems that they're trying to solve, and use that information to help solve the problem. So even designing the questions you ask them is fairly critical. And I think that there's this concept that maybe isn't widespread enough, is the theory of mind. Are we spending enough time building a theory of mind about our customers and which different customers, because we don't have one, we have many different ones. And so how do we identify the different segments of customers that we have, and particularly where they show up in our product?
So let's talk about that a bit more, because I know I wanted to touch on getting into the mind of the user and the perspective of the customer as something that you've referenced is important in building this muscle for experimentation. So what is the theory of mind, and tell us more about how we do this?
Theory of mind, at least from the definitions I've read, is just the understanding of your customer. If you were able to transplant yourself into their mind, how would they think? So it's essentially a fancy way of saying put yourself in their shoes. But I think the nuance here is that, one, people don't do it enough. The deeper I've gone into product and the more products I've worked on, the more I've realized that I don't nearly do this enough. I need to do this twice as much as I currently do. And I need to do it at every level. I need to do it at the stage of like product, inception to requirements definition to, like even before it goes to engineering to after it's done. I need to put myself back in the shoes of the customer again and see, does this fit what we originally wanted them to feel or the value that we wanted them to have? And so I think that making this a little bit more standard in the industry, I think would be super useful.
Yeah, I think some things that we encourage folks. Now, we sell to product managers, so we have to get into the minds of PMs. But regardless of whatever persona you're selling to, we recommend, like, if someone's coming into our company as an employee but hasn't had that experience directly, like they're not a PM themselves, so like subscribe to the same blogs that PM subscribes to, or go to the events that PMs go to. Try to listen to as many calls to really understand, like, hey, where do they go to learn? Who do they hang out with? What do they prioritize? What do they think of as credible? But it's a hard thing. It's a very nebulous thing. And so I wonder if you have any other suggestions or tactics around how do you get into the mind of the user, especially, maybe you're working at a B2C company or something at scale. It's not just like a handful of customers that you're trying to understand.
Yeah, this is a very tough question to answer. And it's I'm thinking about my answer, and after I'm going to say I would have hated when I was early in my career, because it's not very quick. But the reality is that I think at the highest level, we need to understand how the human mind works, and we need to understand what perspectives different populations can have. And so, like, at a very high level, we need to understand the basics of, like, this might be a deep topic, but like myelination in the brain. Essentially, the more you do something, the more you're likely to do something. And this appears kind of like all the time within product. And it appears all the time kind of like as a counter pattern in product. It's very deep, so let's not go into that. But I think, like, anything that you can read at a high level about, like, neuroscience, neurobiology, just understanding how the brain works, that there is like a rational part of the brain. There's like this neocortex that, makes decisions. And then there's an emotional part. And the reality is that the emotional part is the one that's actually creating action. And so maybe one book that I'll reference is Made to Stick by Dan and Shafif. This was like really, really critical for me in understanding that people make decisions emotionally, or at least they take actions emotionally, and how to take that into consideration when building products.
Yeah. I think what you're pointing out, which is leverage some user psychology, understand user psychology. Don't be afraid of it. I think there's another book recommendation I'll throw out, which is Nudge. Really, it's like pop neuroscience. It's easy to get into, but especially for folks building products, it's so valuable because so much of our product and UI is choice architecture. We're helping people make decisions that they would want to make, but it may not be easy for them to make in the moment. Understanding that psychology and the power that you have in architecting your UI. But then also, like, I like growth.design as a good kind of blog, because they also break down some of the psychology behind it. Useronboard.com did that a while back, where it tells you, like, why is there frustration. And one of the things that we have everyone do when they join Chameleon is record a friction log when you are using the product. And friction logging is, I think, an underused technique where you have to record and write down, undertaking a flow in the product or trying to accomplish some task in the product. And then you go back through it and you highlight the emotional state that you were in as you were doing those tasks. And it's a simple traffic light color coding. So where were you happy and this was moving forward? And where was there like yellow flags? And where was it like a stop and turn around moment, like a red flag? And I think connecting that to the emotion can really help you empathize with the user of, like, hey, well, I had this emotion, like, where else is my user going to have this emotion, and how do I remove that emotion? So I like this framing of, tying it back is like the shift to craft is really about being in the mindset of the user, so you can have conviction through your intuition, which is built on understanding qualitative data, etc. And some of the tactics to help us get into that motion is to be open to understanding user psychology. Some of these tactics of like being in the places that your users are, so you're having the same influences, and where possible, peeling back what their like interactions look like on their job. And not being afraid to talk about emotion, understanding emotion as part of the key decision-making conditions in addition to logic or reason.
Well, I think I was going to add to your point. I think you said a lot of fascinating things, and a couple of things that came to mind is that I gave the very hard, like long-term, read books and build intuition answer. But I think there's like a very short, fast answer is like, what would you do? Like if you were in this situation, how would you feel? If you like, and I think it's helpful to think about yourself as an abstraction, because it's when you're building a specific product, whether it's Chameleon or, ClickUp or whatever it is, you're very invested in the product and you're very invested in the details and nuances. But think about yourself and how you interact with another product. So for example, think about how you interact with, for example, Spotify. When you open Spotify for the first time and you get some pop-up that asks you to add something to a playlist, you're like, I don't care about this. And so when you're designing a pop-up and you're like, where do I put this? Probably don't put it at the place that you wouldn't care to answer it. I think people undervalue their own intuition as what like the likely answer might be. And the reality is that that's probably a very good starting point. Maybe it's not the whole picture, but it's a great place to start. And I go ahead.
I was going to add to this. It's good. It's a good segue to something that I tell our customers is like, don't design in-app experiences that you're dismissing yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you enjoying this experience? Like, are you looking forward to this experience? Or are you like, no, this is a chore? Because it's crazy to me that there's so many bad in-app experiences, pop-ups, walkthroughs, product tours, because I bet the people that design them don't want to go through them. And so why do you think that your user who's less invested than you are in your product wants to do this? So, it's like a really simple like sense check is like, is this an enjoyable experience? Because really they should be aha moments. They should unlock something where someone's like, cool, I didn't know this was possible. I've had those through in-apps recently.
Yes.
I was using Loom recently and it was like, hey, cut out all the ums by clicking this. And I was like, oh,
amazing.
That's pretty good. Like, let me do this. And it was right after I finished the recording and it was perfect timing. So I think there is like value for in-app experiences that could be pop-up in nature or intrusive in nature, but they have to get the timing right, which is quite hard. And so we're also seeing this shift and trend towards more embedded experiences, which are less risky because they're not interrupting your workflow, but they're available for you to like engage with. And I saw one from Canva, saw one from one of our customers, Shortcut, where it's like embedded in line. It's like kind of snazzy. It's like, hey, when are you ready to learn more about this? And great, this is when I'm ready, when I finish my workflow. But interrupting users is just too high risk. So yeah. Absolutely.
Actually, there's a good example that came to mind is this idea. You can get a very good sense of, rather, different surfaces will give you a different sense of the user's intent. And I think some surfaces have what I call like a low intent variance, and some surfaces have a high intent variance. So in some surfaces, you're pretty sure with fairly high confidence what the user wants. If you're in a settings page that asks you that the settings, like the link to go into the page is like notifications for podcast episodes, you're pretty sure they want notifications for podcast episodes, right? And you can narrow down the product experience based on the user's likely intent. But if you're on a homepage, the intent variance is very high. You're not sure what they want. If it's Spotify, you probably know that they want some type of audio, but maybe they want to subscribe, so it's very large. So the idea is think about the variance of the intent of the user and use that as a yardstick for your conviction.
Great. Love that framing. Also because I think it ties with risk. Like when there's large variance, there's large uncertainty. So if you're going to be like, hey, on this homepage, I'm going to push everyone to this thing, it's just risky. And so, that's why maybe in homepages, we see maybe multiple cards or multiple like options because it's hard to figure out intent. And hopefully over time, we'll get better at that with, understanding the past behavior and activity. We recently launched a product called Help Bar, which is like a Command K search interface. And we automatically show you the most recent visited pages. And I think there's some logic based on time of day or time of week or something. And so it's like, great. It's like, okay, this is where I'm likely to be. And I hope that we'll see more of those in product over time. It's just like, surfacing the places where I'm likely to be and the actions that I'm likely to want. So looking forward to a future on that. Anything that you'd want to add or key points that you maybe have thought of like, hey, I want to, communicate, like if we're building this muscle, if a PM's listening, they want to improve their ability to run experimentation for their team or their company, any other tips or tactics that you'd want to suggest to them?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about purchasing particularly because if I'm to choose like a niche of a niche of a niche, my niche has been like premium subscription revenue. And I've worked a lot on like pricing and packaging and checkout pages. So I think one thing to be aware of, because this is so tightly tied to revenue, is understanding where the user is on their kind of decision-making journey on whether to adopt a product or not. So, are they at awareness? For example, they can be clicking into your buy page, into your, plans page, just because they want like a high level of awareness or of what even the options are. Are they at the awareness stage or are they at the research stage? Like they're aware, but they're looking around. Or are they at the consideration stage? Like now they're really serious. They're not ready to buy, but they're actively thinking. And based on these different stages, how do you develop how do you make sure that you cater to each of these different stages of the product buying process, not just on the pricing or the checkout page, but through the entire product? Like, for example, I've seen many products nowadays, consumer products, that they don't even have a button that you need to click to buy. Like it's buried into settings. And one of the things that we found at Spotify is that a lot of people are convinced, and actually I think this is fairly true, they're convinced to buy a product outside of the product. Like they've been thinking about this over months or, weeks or whatever, and they come into the product with the intent to buy. And when their credit card in hand, you need to have the cash register in front of them. Give them the ability to actually click through and buy. So make sure you cater to awareness and research and consideration, but also cater to when they're ready, they have the intent to buy. Make sure that you don't make it like so obvious, like these, cheesy upgrade buttons that look like Shibuya in Tokyo with like the changing colors, but make sure they have some like the obvious place where they would go to look that it's there and you can take their money when they're ready to.
And that's basically allows them to self-select. Are there any data points or signals that you feel like people should track or should be thinking about to understand intent? Because it's one of the hardest things to figure out is like, what is the intent?
Yeah, I think the main thing that I would say is like thinking about the surface that they're at and trying to extract intent from there. But also one thing that I think is under indexed on is if you have a fairly high sense of their intent, just ask them, are you considering buying right now? Are you not considering buying? I mean, it's like you said, if it's a service that's not intrusive, you could just ask them the question. That can really expedite like the hand raisers versus not really being that much of a downside for the people that are just there to consider. So asking users, I think, is like really undervalued.
Love that insight. And I 100% agree. We encourage people to use like in-app microservices. They're so underutilized, and especially if they're not intrusive, if they're embedded, you can get a lot of information about that from people. I'd love to learn two things. Like, where do you go to learn about product management stuff? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, the two main resources I use for learning about product are Reforge. Reforge is just an incredible resource, and Lenny's newsletter. So I can dive in quickly. Reforge, I was mind blown the first time I took a Reforge course because the way that they structure their courses and the cohesiveness of the material overall is just mind boggling. Like they're able to encapsulate and identify and name things that I've been thinking about kind of subconsciously over the years and put them into this topic and then explain them in way more depth than I've ever encountered. And so when you finish a lesson, you're like, of course, like you're already agreeing with them because it's so much kind of like, between the lines product knowledge that they've just, put into words. And each lesson fits into the next one perfectly. So by the end of a course, you feel like you have a fully grown tree of knowledge on a topic in your mind. And it's just a really nice kind of academic feeling. So
yeah.
Reforge is one.
Yeah. I took a Reforge course. They designed one for founders, which was like, it was like a compressed version, but I don't know. Like, I think a lot of the value is also applying the learnings. Do you feel like you're able to do that? Is it too theoretical and too kind of, some of the criticism has been too frameworky?
It's certainly frameworky. I think there's a place for frameworks because you can, well, maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. When I took courses on growth, and growth is quite tactical and it's also quite misunderstood. So there is a lot of value in being able to explain growth through the words that they use because it gives it a common language, especially when you're doing growth for a startup and for founders. You need to be able to bridge that gap and gain credibility. And so I think in that regard, it was really strong. It's certainly frameworky, but I think that, and this is part of the topic today, a huge percentage of product work is actually thinking about the nuances within a framework. And so I think it's a good overarching framework, but we always need to think about the nuances and apply these lessons in particular circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And then what about, is there a product that you love? Maybe you're currently in love with, and why?
Yeah, there's a few. I'd say the top one right now is likely Fathom. Fathom is an AI note taker. There's a lot of AI note takers, but Fathom is the best one that I found. It has the highest fidelity transcripts and summaries. It's lightning fast. I finish a meeting and the summary's up. And to me, it's the feeling, it's kind of maybe like an overindulgent feeling, but it's the feeling of having your own personal assistant in the meeting. Like, Mike, can you take these notes? But Mike is always there and his name is Fathom. And it's even easier to, let's say, for example, we have next steps to take and just click a button and it tags them as next steps. So this has been super, super useful for me. I don't take any meetings with Fathom anymore. And I think one other thing that I didn't suspect would be so valuable is looking. So essentially I use Fathom as the preamble for any work that I'm going to do based on a meeting. So for example, there was a meeting and there was a request in the meeting. I will go and watch the recording at like 3x speed, and I'll be able to pick up so much more subtext and understanding of what the intent was, like what we're actually looking to get here from that recording that I wasn't able to get otherwise. And so, Fathom has been a game changer for me.
That's awesome. I'm a fan of Fathom as well. I think we've been using it across our company for over, maybe a couple of years. I think we're one of the first folks on their team edition. And I think one of the things when we were searching out for a solution, I think we looked at Gong and others, but they were so sales focused that Fathom really enables everyone in the company to use it. And I, for example, had a feedback conversation just today, and we used Fathom, and it's great. At the end of it, it's like, okay, here are things we're both going to do differently, or we're going to take on to action this meeting. So, and the AI summary was actually really accurate. So yeah, I endorse that too. So great call out. Okay. I thought this was great. Bunch of interesting insights. Where should people connect with you, find you, learn from you? How should they engage with you?
I think the best way to reach out is to go to my website, sepnorouzi.com, or just LinkedIn. Send me a LinkedIn DM or send me an email through my link on sepnorouzi.com.
Great. Okay. Well, Sep, thanks for joining. I really enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to hopefully having you back again.
Likewise. Thanks, Pulkit.
Thanks for tuning in to the Product Lunchbox. Other episodes where I chat with current operators to get tactical advice include topics such as PMing data products, running product in a low meeting culture, designers as PMs, going from 1 to 10 in AI, and lots more. You can catch them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. If you have a question, topic, or a guest suggestion, then please look me up and DM me on LinkedIn. Thanks for your attention.